It was a quiet afternoon when Emma wandered into the old antique store on the edge of town. The air inside was thick with dust, and the scent of aged wood filled her senses. Rows upon rows of forgotten relics, old furniture, and tarnished trinkets cluttered the dimly lit space. But one object caught her eye: a doll, sitting alone on a shelf in the corner. The doll was unlike any Emma had ever seen. Its porcelain skin gleamed eerily under the faint light, and its glass eyes seemed to follow her as she approached. She couldn't explain why, but something about it made her feel uneasy, as if it were waiting for her. The store owner, an elderly man with a frail smile, noticed Emma's fascination with the doll. "She's a rare find," he said with a voice that trembled slightly, almost as if warning her. "Been in my shop for years, but she's special." Emma, ignoring the warning feeling creeping up her spine, handed over the cash. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was watching her even as she sat in the passenger seat of her car, the lifelike porcelain face staring ahead. Every so often she would glance over and swear the doll's eyes had shifted ever so slightly, but when she checked again, they were back to their original position. It was as if the doll was alive. That night, Emma placed the doll on a shelf in her bedroom, trying to ignore the unease bubbling inside her. But as the hours passed, she began to hear faint sounds, soft creaking, almost as if the doll were moving. Her eyes darted to the shelf. The doll hadn't moved an inch, or had it? The next evening, after hearing the creaking again, Emma turned to find the doll had shifted slightly to the left. She laughed it off, blaming it on her imagination. But as the night wore on, the doll's movements became more pronounced, slow, deliberate, and disturbing. It was no longer just a doll, it was something else. One night, as Emma was about to drift to sleep, she saw something in the corner of her eye. A shadow impossibly tall seemed to loom over the doll. She blinked, and the shadow vanished, but her heart raced. Was the doll somehow connected to this presence? Then came the whispers, soft, chilling words that Emma couldn't understand. But they filled the room, curling around her like tendrils of ice. She would wake up to the sound of faint breathing, or sometimes the doll would whisper her name. Desperate for answers, Emma researched the doll. What she found made her blood run cold. The doll had once belonged to a young girl who had disappeared mysteriously years ago. It was rumored that the doll had been cursed, its spirit trapped within it, unable to rest until it claimed another soul. One evening, as Emma watched in horror, the doll's porcelain face cracked, revealing dark, red-tinged cracks beneath. Its eyes seemed to glow with an unholy light, and its mouth curled into a sinister grin. It was no longer a mere doll, it was something far more terrifying. In the dead of night, the doll moved on its own. It wasn't the subtle shifting from before. It crawled across the shelf, its legs jerking unnaturally. Emma could hear its limbs scraping across the wood, like the sound of nails on a chalkboard. Emma's fear grew with each passing day. She tried to get rid of the doll, but it always returned, no matter how far she buried it or how many times she left it at the nearest church. Each time, it was back on her shelf, waiting, watching. Then came the warning: leave or you will be mine. Emma's life spiraled as the doll's influence over her deepened. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. It was full control. She would wake up in strange places, in positions she hadn't remembered. The doll would often be found next to her, its cold eyes staring down at her as though it had been in control the entire time. On one last night of terror, Emma confronted the doll. She demanded it leave her, to take its cursed soul elsewhere. But the doll's eyes gleamed brighter than ever, and it began to move toward her with an unnatural jerking motion. It spoke one final time: "It's too late now." The next morning, Emma was gone. Her room was left in disarray, the doll sitting quietly on its shelf. No sign of struggle, no trace of Emma left behind. The only clue, her cold, lifeless face, staring from the reflection in the doll's eyes.